Her hands trembled as she tied her shoes again. Same gym, same pain, but something felt different. This time, she wasn't going back for the body she thought she should have. She was going back for herself. Like most of us, she wanted results, not perfection. But every attempt seemed to push her further from who she wanted to be. The weights felt heavier. The mirror felt colder. And every morning that voice in her head got a little louder. Maybe I'm just not built for this. She'd tried everything. The expensive memberships. The early morning routines. The meal plans that made her feel like she was punishing herself for being human. And still, nothing stuck. Not because she lacked discipline, but because something deeper was missing. What she didn't realize yet was that the problem wasn't her effort. It was the approach. For years, fitness culture has told us the same story. Go harder, lift heavier, push until you break. And if you don't, you're weak, you're lazy, you're failing. But what if that entire narrative was built on a lie? What if the tools we've been sold were never designed for real bodies, real lives, real limitations? She was about to find out. It started with a small act of rebellion. Instead of returning to the weight rack that left her shoulders screaming and her motivation buried, she picked up something she'd seen tucked in the corner, a set of resistance bands. Simple, portable, almost laughably lightweight. She didn't expect much. But desperation has a way of making us open to the unthinkable. The first rep felt strange, not painful, not intimidating, just present. She could feel her muscles engaging in a way they hadn't before. Not because the load was extreme, but because the tension was constant. Every inch of movement mattered. Every angle demanded focus. And for the first time in months, she didn't feel like she was fighting her body. She felt like she was working with it. But part of her still doubted it could work. After all, how could something so simple replace the iron? How could a stretchy band possibly build strength, sculpt muscle, or give her the transformation she'd been chasing for years? It felt too easy, and in fitness, easy always meant ineffective, right? She thought she was done until that moment. A researcher at a biomechanics lab once explained something fascinating. Progressive resistance isn't about weight alone. It's about tension under load. And resistance bands, when used correctly, provide something dumbbells and barbells can't: variable resistance. The further you stretch the band, the harder it gets. Your muscles never get a break. They're forced to stabilize, adapt, and grow through every phase of the movement. It wasn't about replacing traditional training. It was about expanding what strength could mean. Still, she didn't fully believe it yet, so she tested it. Day after day, she showed up not with perfection, but with curiosity. She started noticing things. Her shoulders, which used to ache after every overhead press, felt stronger without the strain. Her knees, which had always been a weak point, were more stable during squats. And her core, it was firing in ways it never had on machines. She laughed, realizing progress didn't always look like progress. Sometimes it felt quieter, softer, like building a foundation no one else could see. But what surprised her most wasn't the physical change, though, that came to it, was the way her relationship with movement began to shift. She stopped dreading workouts, stopped forcing herself into routines that felt like punishment. And somewhere along the way, she stopped measuring her worth by what her body looked like, and started measuring it by what her body could do. That's when everything clicked. Resistance bands weren't just a tool. They were a gateway to autonomy. No gym required, no heavy equipment, no judgment from strangers or mirrors that made her feel small. She could train at home, in a park, on a work trip, in her living room, while her coffee brewed. The barriers that used to stop her time, money, access, anxiety, suddenly didn't matter anymore. And that freedom changed her. Researchers at Stanford found something similar. When routine meets meaning, consistency finally sticks. It's not about willpower, it's about alignment. When your fitness practice reflects your life instead of interrupting it, you stop needing motivation. You just go. She started to understand that fitness wasn't something you conquered, it was something you cultivated. There was still one thing she couldn't explain, though. Why had no one told her this before? Why had she spent years believing that strength required suffering, that transformation demanded sacrifice, that unless you were lifting heavy, grunting loud, and pushing through pain, you weren't really trying? Maybe because the fitness industry profits from complexity, from making you feel like you need more and more equipment, more programs, more supplements, more proof that you're doing enough. But the truth is simpler, and far more empowering. Your body doesn't need to be broken down to be built up. It just needs to be met where it is. And that's exactly what resistance bands allowed her to do. She could modify every exercise, scale the intensity, target specific muscles with surgical precision, or go full body and functional. She could train for strength, mobility, endurance, or all three. And she could do it all without ever feeling like her body was being forced into someone else's idea of what fitness should be. Part of her still doubted it could work. But doubt, she realized, wasn't the enemy. Doubt was just a question waiting for evidence. So she kept testing, kept refining, and slowly, the results became undeniable. Her posture improved, her energy stabilized, her sleep deepened, and the chronic tightness in her lower back, the kind that had followed her for years, started to release. Not because she was doing more, but because she was doing better. What surprised me most wasn't just how resistance bands improved my experience with strength training, but how everything started to feel different once I switched to the right method. I wasn't expecting such a clear change, and honestly, I tested it more than a few times before I figured out what really worked. This isn't a promotion, just sharing real results that made a noticeable difference for me. I'll leave the link below if you want to explore what I mean. But here's where the story deepens. Because this wasn't just about her body anymore, it was about her mind. About reclaiming a sense of agency in a world that constantly told her she wasn't enough. Every rep became a small act of defiance. Every workout, a reminder that she could show up for herself, not perfectly, not flawlessly, but consistently. And in a culture obsessed with before and after photos, she discovered something revolutionary. The middle mattered more than the ending. Somewhere between the failures and the quiet mornings, she found rhythm and peace. She stopped chasing aesthetics and started chasing function. Stopped comparing herself to filtered images, and started celebrating small wins no one else would notice, like the way her breath steadied during a plank, or the way her grip got stronger week by week, or the way she could finally do a full push-up without modifying, not because she needed to prove anything, but because her body had quietly become capable. That's the thing about sustainable transformation. It doesn't announce itself, it accumulates. And then one day, you look around and realize everything has shifted. She started recommending resistance bands to her friends. Not in a preachy way, just in passing, when someone mentioned they wanted to start working out but didn't know where to begin. Or when someone said they couldn't afford a gym. Or when someone was recovering from an injury and needed something gentler but still effective. And every time, she saw the same spark of curiosity, the same hesitant hope, the same question she'd once asked herself. Could it really be this simple? Yes and no. Because while the tool itself is simple, the practice requires intention. It requires showing up when no one's watching. It requires listening to your body instead of overriding it. It requires patience in a world that worships speed. And it requires believing, even when the mirror hasn't caught up yet, that you are already enough. That last part, that's the hardest. But it's also the most important. Because fitness, at its core, is not about transformation. It's about recognition. Recognizing that your body is not a problem to be solved. It's not a project. It's not a before photo waiting for redemption. It's a living, breathing, constantly adapting system that wants to move, to grow, to thrive. All you have to do is give it the chance. When she looked in the mirror again, it wasn't her reflection that had changed. It was what she believed about herself. She no longer saw someone who needed fixing. She saw someone who was becoming, and that shift, that quiet, internal revolution, was worth more than any number on a scale or any compliment from a stranger. She had found her path, not the one fitness magazines told her to follow. Not the one social media influencers sold in 30-second clips, but her path. The one that made sense for her body, her schedule, her goals, her life. And it started with something as simple as a resistance band. So here's the real question. What would you do in that moment? If you could strip away all the noise, all the pressure, all the external expectations, what would movement look like for you? What would strength feel like if no one else was watching? That's the invitation. Not to be perfect. Not to follow someone else's program, but to show up for yourself in whatever way feels true. To experiment, to adapt, to honor your body as it is, while gently guiding it toward where you want it to be. Because the revolution isn't happening in the gym. It's happening in the quiet moments, when you choose yourself, again, and again, and again. This is not medical advice, just an educational exploration of what movement can mean when it's rooted in respect, not force. Always consult with a healthcare professional before beginning any new fitness routine, especially if you have underlying health conditions or injuries. But know this, your journey doesn't have to look like anyone else's. And your starting point is exactly where it needs to be. Tell us what part of this story resonated most, and where you're watching from. See you in the next video. Tell us which country or city you're watching from. See you in the next video. Bye.